Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about the Gerber LMF2. Let's get into it. Now the Gerber LMF2 gets compared a lot to knives like the BK10, the Gerber Strong Arm, things like that. And so it gets mixed reviews. But today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to compare it to a knife that's really more in its class. So when I talk about class, we think of like the BK2, we think about the Strong Arm. Those are in the tactical, kind of survival, outdoors, maybe borderline bushcraft type classes, right? And so people will categorize those knives accordingly. This knife, however, is in a completely different class. This is an ASEK knife, Air Crew Survival Egress knife. And so that's the class this knife is in. It's not supposed to be a bushcraft knife. It's not supposed to be a wilderness, survival knife, a WSK. And so that's the class this knife fits in. So when you're comparing this knife to another blade, it should be compared to a knife that's in that same class. So I'm going to compare it with this knife. This is another ASEK knife. This is Ontario's version of the ASEK blade. They both have very similar features. So we're going to compare those. I'm also going to show you kind of how I use this knife, my experience with the LMF2, so that when you're deciding what kind of knife you want to get, you can make a good decision. First of all, what is this knife for? It is designed to help downed pilots get out of their aircraft. It allows them to cut through the fuselage, to get out of the craft, break the glass, things like that. And what really sets this knife apart from the other knives that I mentioned, which I've used all the other ones too, but what sets this knife apart is that it's electrically insulated, right? That's really the key difference. And so we'll talk about that here in a bit. But if you had to cut live wire, you would want something like this because you won't get shocked, right, when you cut live wire. And so from a civilian perspective, or if you're not in an aircraft, this would make a really good, I've said this in one of my other videos, but this would make a really good bug out of bag knife. So if you were in a situation where you just had to get up and go, and you're weren't sure what knife to bring, you wanted a knife that would kind of do anything, this is a good option. I also call this my car knife because I keep this knife in my car, and if I ever needed to cut through my car or cut through something in the engine or whatever, I wouldn't have to worry about getting shocked because it is electrically insulated. So this is a great knife for any kind of urban type situation in your car in the city. You have to bug out, and you're or how about this scenario? You needed to cut through a wall in your house. You're trapped, cut through some sheetrock to get to the next room, and you don't know what wires are behind that sheetrock. And so this would be a good knife for that because it, again, the quality of being insulated. So that's where this knife kind of shines compared to all the others. None of the others that I mentioned are electrically insulated. So when you're comparing knives and you're trying to figure out what knife you want, keep that in mind. That's what sets these knives apart, right? This is also electrically insulated. That said, let's get into the LMF2. So the LMF2, and I'm not going to go into all of the specs because they're very well documented on other videos, but just kind of high level. The LMF2, again, there's a break between the tang and the butt cap, and I hear this a lot. They say, well, it's not full tang, so it's just not a good knife. So real quick, we'll just talk about that. Correct, it's not full tang. So the tang comes all the way down to about here, and then there's a small break, and then the butt cap is fitted on. So It doesn't go all the way through. That's by design, so you won't get shocked if you're cutting wire or whatever you're doing. That said, here's my debate to that. That said, and again, here's the gap, right, between the tang and the butt cap. If I take a hacksaw and cut that butt cap off, I'm going to see the tang right here. Then does it become full tang? Food for thought, right? I think this is just as strong as any full tang knife. So the argument that it's not full tang, I think, doesn't really hold up, because the tang does come down to the end of your hand. So I don't, yeah, I think the full tang argument doesn't really apply to this blade. It's not full tang, but it would perform the exact same way if the butt cap wasn't there. So there's that. It is 420 HC, which is a good metal. It's stainless steel, so it's corrosion resistant, and it's hardened very well by Gerber. They do a really good job with their heat treat. It is designed to cut through the fuselage of an aircraft, right, the aluminum. So it is a really good heat treat on this blade. Couple of things to know about the ASEK model knives, right? They had different requirements that they had to meet to be considered an ASEK. And so this is the Ontario version. They had to have serrations, right, for cutting seat belts. They had to have holes to be lashed to a spear. So this is Ontario's take on this. They had to have the glass breaker for breaking through the plexiglass or the glass on the aircraft. They had to have a makeshift hammer, I believe. They had to be electrically insulated. I think there was a length requirement, like just under 5 inches or something like that too. So they both meet those requirements. Why the military went with one versus the other, I forget the whole story. It may have been cost. Maybe these were a little cheaper to produce. That happens sometimes. So if you're looking for a knife that is a car knife, a bug-out bag knife, a urban survival knife of sorts, something that you might need to cut through a live wire, which knife would you go with? But these are the top two contenders. So when you think of ASEK knife, you think of one of these two. So which knife would you pick? Again, this is more of a review of the LMF2. I'm not going to review this one too much. This is really more here for comparison. But they both kind of do the same purpose. And I'm comparing them because, again, a lot of times this knife gets compared to other knives that are in a completely different category of knives. So this is more of a fair comparison. So again, stainless. This one is a 1095. I believe it's 1085. Correct me if I'm wrong. But it is a carbon steel, right? So not stainless, stainless. The other thing, as I hold them both, right, this handle is very, very comfortable, no doubt. But it feels small for my hands, whereas this one kind of fills my hands quite a bit more. So if you have really large hands, I don't know that you're going to like this knife, maybe. But there's that. The rubber on this knife is more squishy, has more give to it. Versus this knife, and there's no give to that grip. It is a solid grip. So depending on what you like, you might go with one versus the other. While I'm thinking about it too, if you're chopping with the LMF2, that is a downfall. It chops really well. It's not designed for it, but it does a good job. Except for this piece back here. It does dig into your hand just a little bit. So going to be wearing gloves or something, but it will eventually rub you right here. So just kind of call out there. This knife, kind of, not so much, but it also doesn't feel like it can chop very well either. It just feels like, it's just much lighter compared to the two. Anyway, so just a quick call out there. I tried to flex this knife, and I'll see if you can see it. There is like it's maybe barely, maybe right there in that little gap, versus this one, and this one you can actually see it. It actually flexes quite a bit. So again, there's a gap there. That's understood. It's by design. Neither of these are technically what full tang, I guess, but they would function as full tang knives because even on this one, the tang comes down to like right here. So, but there's that. From a hammer perspective, I have several LMF2s, and I've used the hammer multiple times, and it works really well. I like the hammer on this thing. This one I've not used, but I would imagine it kind of functions really similar. My concern though, and I don't want to get into the sheath just yet, but the LMF2 sheath is actually designed with this rubber overmold to use the hammer, right? So you would put it in, and then there's your hammer. And that's the way I use it, and it works really well. The sheath that comes with the Ontario ASEK not so much. So I'm not sure exactly how they designed that hammer to be used. Very dangerous, no matter how you kind of, I don't know. But I don't know what the intent was here. Maybe it's to, I don't know, that's a glass breaker. So there's that. But they both have a hammer. I definitely like this hammer better. As far as the handles go, it's preference. This one is definitely comfortable but tiny. If this one was a little bit bigger, more pronounced, then I think would be better. So I'm going to give the win to the LMF2, although it is a harder knife. If you use it for long periods of time, it will eventually kind of, I'm used to it, you know, I don't have a problem with it, but some people have complained that eventually your hand will get tired. I haven't experienced that just yet. Let's go to the glass breaker. They both work really well. And then the lashing holes for the spear. I've used this one before. I've lashed it to a spear. Not so much on this one, but I will just tell you the LMF2, in my opinion, works just much better because the way the spear is going to work, right, is you're going to put the stick right here, and you're going to wrap the lashings around the stick, so it makes sense then that the lashing holes would be on the side of the blade versus on the hilt. The only slight downfall, I guess, would be because the holes are actually in the blade. When you take the knife apart, the metal actually goes outside of these holes, right, and then comes back down to the tang. So it could weaken the blade. I guess you could argue that, although I've never seen a blade actually break right there with, you know, regular use. But the blades are also, this blade is also way thinner, see? So is it that, look at, I mean, just way, just not as much metal. So is it that big of a deal? I don't think so. I also like just a simple call out on the LMF2. There's kind of an indent right here. And so when you're making a spear out of this knife or whatever the case may be, the stick fits great right there. You wrap it up and it holds. I hear people say, well, I would never turn my knife into a spear. That's silly. Yeah, that's a fair point. But if you're trying to reach something high up in a tree and you need to cut it and bring it down, you might need to put a spear or put a stick on your knife to give you that extra reach to cut it. You don't want that knife falling down on you. Of course, that would be bad. And so you would want to make sure that it's securely latched onto the stick. So from a spear, from a lashing perspective, right, the holes in the knife, the LMF2, in my opinion, wins. Let's go to the hilt. Both hilts are secure. This one obviously will not let your hand slip to the blade, so if you needed to, you know, jab at something, it won't let you slip. This one, the hilt is not as pronounced. I've never had problems with it, but I guess your chances of slipping are more with this blade than with this blade. So we'll give the win to the Ontario ASEK, not the LMF2. But I don't think that's an issue. I think it's just, I've never heard of anyone's hand slipping on the LMF2. I guess I'll put it that way. All right, let's go to the blade. The blade difference is kind of interesting, right? So here's the ASEK. Here's the LMF2. The LMF2, as you can tell, is thicker. There's just a lot more stock than the Ontario ASEK. It's a little bit longer too, just a tad, but I guess that's not a huge difference. From a side-to-side profile, you see the LMF2 is, like I said, is wider, I guess, right? Wider. There's just more metal side to side. Does that, I would imagine that means it's a stronger blade. You don't have to worry about it snapping anytime soon here. Whereas this one, I don't know, depending on how you use the blade, right? It's a thicker and wider knife. So I prefer that, right? I don't want my knife to break on me in the field, no matter what I'm doing with it, within reason. It does have, the Ontario ASEK does have that sawback, and I love sawback, so if that's your thing, then maybe consider that. And because, just giving it its credit, right, because it is a flat grind, the sawback should work pretty well. I think I've seen videos of it, and it works pretty well because it won't get hung up, right, as you're sawing through things. So I would imagine it works really well. The problem with that, it's hard to throw sparks with this knife if you're using a ferro rod, if you're using the back of the blade. And I'll show you here. I'm making a fire with this knife. It just works really well. With this one, the videos that I've seen, they tend to use the serrations, which I don't like doing,
crazy
right?
sparks when you do this.
Your cutting edge should be for cutting. I don't want to dull it by throwing sparks. And then moving towards the serrations. Now the serrations are completely different, as you'll see. These are kind of more fine. This is Gerber's standard serrations. I like these serrations, the same serrations that are on the 06 Auto and some of their other knives. They work really well. These are okay. For the purpose of cutting straps, I'm sure they're both fine. But when it comes to things like making a fire, things like making fire tenders and shavings, these work so much better. And so I'm just making a fire. Cool, huh? All right, so let's go to the tips. This is, again, another just huge difference. Look at the difference in the thickness of just the tips. Watching another video of a guy use his ASEK, he even kind of calls it out. You wouldn't want to pry too much with this tip for fear you might break that tip off. And looking at it, I totally agree. That is a thin. It's not fragile by any means, but it is a thinner tip compared to this guy.
So if you need to,
I would never worry about breaking that tip. That is it stays 3/16 of an inch all the way to about here.
The tip I'm sticking in now
tapers off slightly to about here, and then finally gets to the tip. Whereas this one,
like that,
it starts tapering off like way here, and then starts getting thinner.
There,
so
I can do it.
Tip strength,
that's not soft.
Definitely LMF2. Okay, let's get to the sheaths. So again, I've customized this sheath a little bit for the LMF2. I've added my own things. Here's my fire rod. Here's my Titan cord. And I think that's really all I did with it. I kind of adjusted a little bit of how the top piece attaches to the sheath here. And oh, I added some like fish hooks and emergency needles and stuff in the back. And so anyways, all that's my design. This is all kind of my design, and how it, how it operates. But this is Ontario's sheath. The first thing that I saw is, well, it's ugly. But besides that, I was reading that the LMF2 or the ASEK style knife needed multiple points of retention. So on this knife, that's one. It will not come out. Then you have your retention straps here. So there's two, and then there's a third one. So you have three retention straps, or 3 points of retention. And the thought here, I think, is if you're parachuting, you don't want it coming off or losing your knife, or I guess if you're in a plane crash, you wouldn't want your knife coming undone, and so you have 3 points. It's solid, right? It will not come out. This one only has 2 points of retention that I can tell. See, this is not a point of retention. That will definitely come out easily. But it does have these two, right? Here's one, and here's two. So I forget, I need to read it again. I forget if to be an ASEK knife it had to have 2 or 3 points of retention. This one has 2, that one has 3. So yeah, I'd totally go with this sheath over this sheath. Going back to the hammer, same thing. It has no point of retention, so if you wanted to pull this piece back here and hammer with it, you can just hear it kind of moving around, and will it slide out or whatever? That would be bad. Versus this one, if you wanted to hammer with this one, it's not going to come out. It will not come out. So definitely A+ on that retention for that sheath. The sheath on the Ontario ASEK is a plastic insert surrounded by this nylon Cordura material. Again, just, I don't know, basic. Whereas this one is a rubber overmold. It's got the plastic. But what's cool about this one is it has the built-in sharpener, which is just really neat. Very cool if you wanted to sharpen your knife quickly in the field, get a workable edge back on it. Very awesome. This knife came with a sharpener, and I forget if it went in this pouch up here, but there was a sharpener, stone of some sort, that you could pull out and sharpen your knife. So, I don't know, I love this sharpener. I've used it a lot on other LMF2 knives that I have. Just the better option for sharpening your blade. This is my knife of choice if I'm going to bug out, if I'm going to be in any kind of urban survival situation. You're in the city, you're traveling from one end to the other, your car could break down, there could be a situation where you have to walk home. What knife would you want on you? I would always pick my LMF2. Now, if you're going to go out in the woods, you're going to be on the woods for several weeks, I would pick probably a different knife. This would stay in my car and would take me to the woods. But I might choose a different knife that's more designed for woodwork and processing, and maybe something like my Tom Brown Tracker, or something like just one of those other knives. But would I take this in the woods with me? If this was the knife that I had, absolutely, and it does great. So here I'm in the woods and I'm processing wood and making a fire. It will do what I need it to do in the woods, right? In the wilderness. It will absolutely make a fire. It'll absolutely leave baton. Oh yeah, here's the other thing, just to touch on quickly about these two knives, is batoning. I hear this one gets such a bad rap for batoning. They start beating on the blade and it starts doing really well, then they beat on the handle, and then the handle starts chipping because it's rubber, and So it gets a bad rap, and they're like, oh, it's a horrible knife because. But when you look at people batoning with this knife, again, same category of knives, they never hit the handle. They always hit the thing, and they're, oh, it does really great, right? They always hit the spine of the blade. And when you're batoning, that is the correct technique. Is what I believe is to hit the spine of the blade to work it through the wood. But users of this knife never hit the handle. They just know better. It's interesting. Users of this knife tend to hit the handle, and they break it, and then they complain. So if you're batoning with just the back of the blade, it worked great. It works great. It will go through thick pieces of wood. It'll process wood very easily. Just don't hit the handle. I don't understand what the issue is there. But again, users of this knife, they just know better. So they just never hit the handle. So they never complain about it. Will it take the abuse? I mean, it seems like a really soft rubber. I don't think it would. I think if you batoned and hit this handle, you would damage it and chip it and eat away at it really, really quickly. And going back to the LMF2, the previous versions of this knife had a softer rubber hilt. It felt more like this, actually. But people kept complaining about it, so they made a much harder rubber. Now, the newer ones have a much harder rubber that might take that impact a little bit more. And I have not hit this hilt with my batoning stick, so maybe it holds up much better. I don't know, because I always baton with the blade, but they did make an improvement to that hilt rubber, but this one is still that softer rubber. So all that said, the LMF2 performs really well in different environments. So if I had to pick one knife, what would it be? That's what I get asked a lot. You got to bug out, what knife would you pick? And as I look at all my knives, I would pick the LMF2 all the time. This is my one knife that I would pick and go with it. Why? Blade thickness, stoutness, which will not break, ever. You're not going to break the tip, you're not going to break that blade. Now I'm not talking about hitting with a sledgehammer. I'm just normally using your knife, batoning with it, even abusing it to an extent. It'll hold up just fine. So the blade is definitely a plus. Thick, stout, tip is really thick, so very nice there. It is stainless, so you don't have to worry about it rusting like you would like a carbon steel. It is easy to keep sharp because of the sharpener here. Some people will say, what about the serrations? Well, the serrations will stay sharp for a long time. But if you're that worried about it, just bring another small diamond sharpener with you, and you can keep them sharp. It's not that difficult. The other thing is it's electrically insulated. It's a cool feature to have. And then, of course, it has all the other additional, it's got the hammer, it's got the glass break, etc. Lashing it to a spear. It just has so many features on this knife that it makes it very versatile. So if I had to pick one knife and bug out, this would be the knife that I would pick all the time, every time. It's just the knife to go with. So if you're in the market for an ASEK blade, you want an urban survival knife that will last, that will do everything you need it to do, that's tough. Your top two choices would be either the Ontario ASEK knife or the Gerber LMF2 knife. And again, you're looking specifically for an ASEK blade, right? So it has to be insulated. It has to have all the different features you want to get out and get home, all that kind of good stuff. Which one would I go with? I would go with the LMF2. It's just a wonderful knife. Buy it, learn how to use it, work with it. As you'll see in my video, making a fire is very easy. And if you have this knife and you've used it and you want to comment on something that I may have pointed out, let me know. But I do think it's a good knife. I've seen it used, just not as durable. I would not trust, if I had to trust my life on one of these knives, I'd probably pick this one. All right, so those are my thoughts on the Gerber LMF2, doing a comparison with the Ontario ASEK. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, this is Gear Modder signing out.